Abigail Whitney Johnson clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the church doors slammed behind her, the echo reverberating like thunder across the dusty main street of Riverbend, California. The year was 1875, and at 21 years of age, she had just become an outcast cast out from the only community she'd ever known, with nothing but the clothes on her back and the unborn child in her womb. "Don't you dare show your face in this town again, you harlot!" Reverend Simmons's words still rang in her ears, his face contorted with righteous indignation as the church elders stood behind him, nodding their approval. The autumn wind whipped across the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Abigail Abbey, to those who had once claimed to care for her, had nowhere to go. Her parents had died 3 years prior in a typhoid epidemic, leaving her in the care of her Aunt Martha, who now stood among those condemning her. 2 months, she whispered to her still flat stomach as she trudged down the dirt road leading out of town. 2 months since Thomas left for San Francisco promising to return and marry me. 2 months since I was fool enough to believe him. Thomas Reed had been handsome, charming, and utterly faithless. A traveling salesman who had swept through town selling patent medicines and empty promises. By the time Abby realized she was with child, he was long gone, and the letter she'd sent to his San Francisco address had been returned unopened. Night was falling rapidly as she reached the outskirts of town. The lights of Riverbend winked behind her like accusing eyes. Ahead lay miles of open country, dotted with scattered homesteads and ranches. She had no plan beyond putting distance between herself and the condemning stares of those who had been her neighbors and friends her entire life. The first drops of rain began to fall as darkness closed in completely. Abby stumbled along the muddy road, her skirts growing heavier with each step. She had eaten nothing since morning, and exhaustion pulled at her limbs like lead weights. In the distance, a light flickered, a lantern hanging from a post. As she drew closer, Abby could make out the shadowy outline of a barn. Beyond it stood a modest farmhouse, smoke curling from its chimney. The Silver Creek Ranch, she recalled, owned by the reclusive Hayes Xavier, a man who rarely came to town except to sell his cattle or buy supplies. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating her surroundings in stark relief. The rain was coming down harder now, and Abby knew she couldn't remain exposed to the elements much longer, not in her condition. She would seek shelter in the barn for just one night, she decided. At first light, she would continue on her way to somewhere, anywhere that would take in a woman in her circumstances. The barn door creaked as she pushed it open just enough to slip inside. The rich smell of hay and horses enveloped her as she closed it behind her, shutting out the storm. It was dark save for the occasional flash of lightning through the cracks in the wooden walls, but it was dry and considerably warmer than outside. Abby made her way to a pile of clean hay in the corner and sank down gratefully. The voice was deep, steady, and unmistakably male. "I know someone's in here. Show yourself." Abby considered remaining hidden, but knew it was futile. This was his property, after all. Slowly, she rose to her feet, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping forward into the circle of lantern light. "I was caught in the storm and needed shelter. I'll leave immediately." Hayes Xavier raised the lantern higher, illuminating Abby's face. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 30 or so, with dark hair and a face weathered by years under the sun. His eyes, which she could now see were a striking blue, narrowed slightly as he took in her bedraggled appearance. "You're the Johnson girl," he said, recognition dawning on his face. "Martha's niece." Abby looked down, shame washing over her. "Yes." Hayes set the lantern on a hook and crossed his arms. "It's the middle of the night, and there's a storm raging out there. What are you doing wandering about alone?" "I was," she faltered, unable to find the words. How did one explain being cast out like garbage by the people who were supposed to love you? Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Have you eaten?" he asked finally. The question was so unexpected that Abby could only stare at him in confusion. "Have you eaten anything today?" he repeated. She shook her head. Hayes nodded decisively. "Come up to the house. You can get dry, have something to eat, and sleep in a proper bed. We'll figure out the rest in the morning." "I couldn't possibly, Miss Johnson. I'm not in the habit of leaving women, especially expectant mothers, out in barns during thunderstorms." "Now, are you coming willingly? Or am I going to have to carry you?" There was something in his tone that brooked no argument. Abby found herself nodding, too exhausted and grateful to protest further. Hayes's farmhouse was modest but neat. A fire burned in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the simple furnishings. He directed her to a chair by the fire and disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a bowl of stew and a chunk of bread. "Eat," he said, placing it in her hands. "It's nothing fancy, but it's hot." Abby hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate with embarrassing eagerness while Hayes busied himself gathering blankets and pillows. "The bedroom's through there," he said, nodding toward a door. "You can sleep there tonight." "Where will you sleep?" "I'll be fine out here by the fire." Abby set down her empty bowl, feeling awkward. "Mr. Xavier, I don't know how to thank you." He waved off her gratitude. "Any decent person would do the same." "Not everyone," she said quietly, thinking of the faces of the townspeople as they'd turned their backs on her. Hayes's jaw tightened. "Then not everyone is decent." He paused, studying her face. "If you don't mind my asking, what about the father?" "Gone," Abby said simply. "He was passing through town. Made promises he never intended to keep." Hayes nodded, unsurprised. "You should rest. We can talk more in the morning." The bedroom was sparsely furnished but clean, with a quilt-covered bed that looked impossibly inviting to Abby's tired eyes. She removed her damp outer clothing and slipped beneath the covers, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep almost immediately. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she had gotten there. Then it all came rushing back: the church, the storm, Hayes Xavier finding her in his barn. After washing her face with water from the basin on the dresser, Abby made her way to the kitchen. Hayes was at the stove frying bacon. He turned when she entered. "Good morning," he said. "Sleep well." Abby nearly choked on her coffee. "I beg your pardon?" "Hear me out," Hayes said, his expression serious. "You need a name for your child and a roof over your head. I need help running this place. I've been on my own since my pa died 3 years ago, and it's more than one man can handle properly." "You can't be serious." "I'm entirely serious. It would be a practical arrangement. You'd have security and respectability, and I'd have someone to keep house and help with the chickens and garden. I'm not much of a cook either, as you'll soon discover if you sample that bacon." "And you'd claim it as your own?" "If you'll have me, yes. We can say we were married quietly some months ago. You've been living with your aunt while I prepared the house. No one needs to know any different." Abby's mind whirled with the implications. It was an outrageous proposal, practically a stranger offering to give his name to her and her unborn child. And yet, what choice did she have? What future awaited an unwed mother in 1875? "You don't need to answer right away," Hayes said, mistaking her silence for hesitation. "Take some time to think it over." In the meantime, Abby threw herself into making the farmhouse more of a home. Years of bachelor living had left it functional but sparse. She found fabric stored away that she could use to make curtains, and Hayes brought down boxes of household items that had belonged to his mother from the attic. They slept separately, he on a pallet by the fire, she in the bedroom. Hayes was unfailingly respectful, never overstepping boundaries even as they learned to navigate the strange intimacy of sharing living quarters. "Why do you live so isolated?" Abby blushed and glanced at Hayes, who merely smiled and thanked Wilson for coming. That night, after the guests had gone, Abby stood awkwardly in the middle of the room, uncertain what came next. They were legally husband and wife now, but their arrangement had been made clear from the start. This was a marriage of convenience, nothing more. "I'll make up my bed by the fire," Hayes said, reaching for the blankets. "Wait," Abby said. "This is your home and now I've taken your bed. I can't keep displacing you from your own bedroom." "It's our home now," he corrected gently. That night, they lay side by side with a careful space between them, both acutely aware of the other's presence. Abby found herself studying Hayes's profile in the dim light filtering through the curtains. He was a handsome man, she realized, not in the flashy way Thomas had been, but in a solid, dependable manner that she was finding increasingly appealing. "Hayes," she whispered, testing his name on her lips. She had been calling him Mr. Xavier until the wedding, after which he'd insisted she use his given name. "Thank you for everything." He turned his head to look at her. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Abby. We're helping each other. Remember? Still, not many men would do what you've done. Not many men have been fortunate enough to find a capable wife suddenly appearing in their barn," he countered with a hint of humor. Abby laughed softly, and something warm unfurled in her chest. For the first time since discovering her pregnancy, she felt a flicker of hope for the future. Winter settled over the ranch with a vengeance. When they finally returned, Abby was semi-conscious, her face drawn with pain. The doctor examined her, his expression grim. "She's having a threatened miscarriage," he told Hayes. "She needs complete bed rest. No exertion whatsoever. I'll leave medicine for the pain, but the rest is up to God and her own constitution." Hayes didn't leave Abby's side for the next 3 days. He bathed her forehead with cool cloths when fever set in, spooned broth between her lips when she was conscious enough to swallow, and whispered reassurances when she cried out in her sleep. On the 4th day, the bleeding stopped, and Abby's fever broke. The doctor, making a follow-up visit through the still deep snow, pronounced her out of immediate danger. "The baby?" she asked weakly. "Still with us?" Dr. Peterson confirmed, placing a hand on her rounded abdomen. "A fighter, like its mother." When they were alone again, Abby reached for Hayes's hand. "You saved us." He brought her fingers to his lips. "I couldn't bear to lose you," he admitted. "Either of you." Something shifted between them after that, a new tenderness, a deeper understanding. Hayes still slept on his side of the bed, but now Abby would sometimes wake to find his arm draped protectively around her, his hand resting lightly on her growing belly. As spring thawed the land, Abby's strength returned fully, and with it came new life to the ranch. Hayes helped her plant a vegetable garden larger than he'd ever bothered with before, and they added more chickens to their small flock. One bright April morning, Hayes announced that they needed to go to town for supplies. "Are you sure?" Abby asked, her hand instinctively going to her 7 months pregnant belly. She hadn't been back to Riverbend since the day she was cast out. "We can't avoid it forever," Hayes said gently. "And I want people to see us together as husband and wife. To see that we're happy and doing well." Abby wasn't as confident, but she understood the necessity. As Hayes helped her into the wagon, she squeezed his hand gratefully. "Whatever happens," he told her, "remember that we face it together now." The stairs began the moment their wagon rolled down Riverbend's main street. Whispers followed them from the general store to the feed merchants, but Hayes kept his head high, treating Abby with obvious affection and respect that couldn't be mistaken. At the dry goods store, they encountered Aunt Martha, who froze in the doorway upon seeing her niece. "Hello, Aunt Martha," Abby said quietly. The older woman's eyes darted from Abby's face to her pregnant belly to the wedding ring on her finger, and finally to Hayes standing protectively at her side. "I see you've been busy," Martha said stiffly. "Yes, married life agrees with us," Hayes replied before Abby could speak. "We're expecting our first child in June." Martha's eyes narrowed. "How convenient that you found a husband so quickly after your situation became known." "Actually," Hayes continued smoothly, "we were married privately last summer. Abby was staying with you while I prepared our home. We didn't feel the need to announce it to those who might not approve of me due to my heritage." His tone was polite but carried a clear challenge. Martha had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I see." "It was good seeing you, Aunt Martha," Abby said, finding her voice at last. "We should be going. We have a home to get back to." Outside, Abby leaned against Hayes, suddenly exhausted. "Thank you for that." He kissed the top of her head in a rare public display of affection. "No one gets to make you feel ashamed, Abby. Not anymore." As they prepared to leave town, they were approached by Reverend Simmons, his expression severe. "Mrs. Xavier," he acknowledged Abby with obvious reluctance. "I trust you've repented of your sins and are living a godly life now?" Before Abby could respond, Hayes stepped forward. "Reverend, with all due respect, my wife has nothing to repent for. She's shown more Christian charity and fortitude than many who claim to follow Christ's teachings. Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to get home." The Reverend spluttered in indignation, but Hayes had already helped Abby back into the wagon and taken up the reins. As they left Riverbend behind, Abby looked at her husband with new eyes. "You defended me." Hayes glanced at her, his expression softening. "Always will." "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, guiding the horses carefully along the rutted road. "Because I love you," he said finally simply. "I think I started falling in love with you that first night in the barn, though I didn't recognize it then." Abby's heart swelled with emotion. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for some time now." Hayes stopped the wagon and turned to her, his eyes searching her face. "You do?" "Yes," she said, smiling through sudden tears. "This stopped being just an arrangement of convenience for me months ago." He cupped her face in his weathered hands and kissed her their first real kiss as husband and wife, filled with all the tenderness and passion that had been building between them. When they parted, Abby laughed softly. "What a pair we are, married for months and only now confessing our feelings." "We've done everything backward," Hayes agreed with a grin. "But I wouldn't change any of it." 2 months later, after 18 hours of labor that left Hayes pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door while the midwife attended to Abby, their son was born. 8 pounds of red-faced, squalling perfection with a shock of dark hair that unmistakably resembled Hayes's own. "He looks like you," Abby said wonderingly as Hayes held his son for the first time. "A miracle," Hayes murmured, blinking back tears. "What shall we name him?" Abby asked. Hayes considered for a moment. "William, after my father." "William Xavier." Abby tested the name. "It's perfect." As summer turned to fall, and fall to winter again, the little family settled into a rhythm of contentment. William, or Will, as they called him, grew into a sturdy, happy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's smile. Hayes expanded the ranch operations, adding sheep to their cattle, and hired 2 hands to help with the increasing workload. The house grew too, with a new room added for Will and plans for more as their family expanded. On the anniversary of the day Hayes found Abby in his barn, he presented her with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, opening it to find a delicate gold locket inside. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a tiny portrait of the three of them, Hayes, Abby, and baby Will, that they had posed for in Sacramento during a rare trip to the city. "It's beautiful," Abby whispered. "I wanted you to have something to commemorate the day our story began," Hayes said, helping her fasten it around her neck. "The day you changed my life. The day we saved each other," she corrected, wrapping her arms around his neck. Outside, the first snow of winter began to fall, but inside their home, all was warmth and love. From the darkest moment of Abby's life had come unexpected joy, proving that sometimes, when you're cast out into the storm, you might just find your way home. 5 years later, the Xavier Ranch had grown into one of the most prosperous in the county. Will, now a lively 5-year-old, had been joined by a 3-year-old sister named Margaret and a new baby brother they'd named Joseph. Abby stood on the porch watching Hayes teaching Will to ride his pony in the corral, Margaret sitting in front of him on his own horse, giggling with delight. Her hand went to the locket she still wore every day, a tangible reminder of how far they had come. From the bundle in her arms came a soft coo, and Abby looked down at Joseph's tiny face, already showing signs of the strong Xavier features. "Your papa and I have quite a story to tell you someday," she whispered to the infant, "about how the best things in life can come from the moments we think all is lost." Hayes looked up and caught her watching. He smiled that special smile he reserved only for her, and Abby's heart filled with gratitude for the man who had found her in his barn that stormy night and offered not just his name, but eventually his heart. In a world that had once cast her out, she had found belonging. In a man who had once been alone, she had found partnership. And together, they had built something neither could have imagined that dark night when fate and desperation had brought them together, a family bound not by obligation, but by the deepest kind of love.